Hi everyone, back with my last video today. This is on the long run cost of a firm. So again, remember long run, well, not remember, but I'm telling you, long run is a time period now where there's no fixed cost. So we don't have that rent that we have to pay. We don't have the lease, anything like that. Everything is variable. And your book goes through, you'll probably see in the other PowerPoint, how to get to your average total cost curve. So this blue line here is also known as your long run average total cost curve. And it's just kind of a culmination of average total cost curves for a firm over time, kind of adding them together. That's not too important. But your average total cost curve in the long run is always going to look kind of U-shaped. Here we have a slight part where we have a flat section, but it's for the most part a U. And so what it's always going to look like for different firms. And we have different categories here, different colors. The first one says economies of scale, constant, and then diseconomies. So the order of these always happens in the same time. Or at the same time. The economies of scale happens first when average total cost is falling. Constant returns to scale happens when we have a flat section. That means our average total cost is staying the same. And then diseconomies is where our average total cost increases. I'll explain a little bit in a second. So let's see. I'm going to erase just this part, just so we can talk a little bit more. I'm going to split this up some. When we're talking about economies of scale, or any of these, really, we're thinking about how the long run average total cost curve is changing. So for the economies of scale, I'm going to use just maybe one for economies of scale, and that's what I'm talking about here. So economies of scale, what that says is as we produce more, we go from like 0 on this, far left side, and we keep producing more output. That says we're producing more, but our average total cost, our cost per unit is falling. So we can say that, again, this is all long run. And this falls as quantity goes up. And this is pretty good for firms, right? You produce more, but your average cost falls. We can also say that this area has increasing returns to scale, or IRS if you want to. IRS. Here we go. So these happen at the same time, but are a little bit different from each other. Increasing returns to scale talks about how much output changes when you increase all the inputs by the same amount. So for instance, let's say that there's a 5% increase in our inputs. So that talks about everything, all of our inputs, whether it's labor or things to make ice cream, milk, and sugar, anything that's variable or input, that we're increasing that by 5%. If we're in this first section, that means our output, or our Q, output Q is going to go up, but by more than 5%. I'm running out of room. More than 5%. So maybe 8%, 20%, 5.5%. Anything that's higher than this 5%. So again, they happen at the same time, but economies of scale is looking at how average total cost changes, and increasing returns is looking at how output changes. All right, I'm going to erase some of this so they don't have room. But you can always pause the video if you need to see more. All right, so I'm going to talk about the middle section. So I'll just call it 2. Oops. So we said this is a flat section. In your book, you'll see that it doesn't always have, the long run average total cost doesn't always have to have a flat middle section, and that's fine. We just have it here, and that's where we have constant returns to scale. We can call that CRS if we want. And we can say, let me go, the long run average total cost remains the same as our output or our quantity goes up. So even though we might be making more output, our average total cost in the long run is exactly the same, and it's not changing. Now, in terms of thinking about increasing inputs, at this time as well, we have where maybe we increase inputs again by 5%, all of our inputs, labor, electricity. Our output, our Q, is going to still go up, but it's going to go up by exactly 5%. Whatever those inputs change by. So it's a constant number. Now, let me get to the next one. Sorry, I have to do this. The third one, where it says diseconomies of scale, call it number 3, and it doesn't look very much like a 3, and I'm sorry. All right, so for 3, diseconomies says that as we are producing more, the long run average total cost goes up. So the per cost unit, again, this is now increasing, where before we had it all falling or staying the same. At this time as well, we have decreasing returns to scale. I'm ordering a new stylus tonight. DRS. And that just says if our inputs increase by a certain amount, maybe that 5% again, just to give it a number, that causes our output to increase. Output, not out. Our output increases by less than 5%. So 2%, something like that. So we're not as productive as we once were. And your book goes through reasons why we might see each of these parts in, for a firm. So this is looking at average total cost over time. And, if we're looking at a firm over time, we're finding this average total cost curve in the long run. Every firm is going to have a similar picture. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it's going to be somewhat similar. So then I'm going to erase all this. I just want to talk about one more thing. Let's see, I'll erase all this to give me more room to talk about it. So another thing that your book discusses is called the MES, or minimum efficient scale. This is quantity where average total cost is at a minimum. So at the lowest point. And well, for our example here, we have this large flat part, and that's the lowest that average total cost is overall. But we're just going to use, or we'd always use, where the first point is, where that minimum starts. So we would say Q1 here is our MES. Now, the MES is important to figure out how many firms are going to be in the market or in a market. If MES is high, there's going to be less firms. That means there's, more maybe startup costs. So if that MES is at a high quantity, we have fewer firms. So maybe, again, I'm saying these startup costs are really high. And to get into this market, it's very difficult. In order to start producing, you would have to pay a lot of money before you even sell the good. And if that's the case, there's not going to be a lot of people that want to go through this. And if the MES is high enough, we could have what's called a natural monopoly. I know the thing that pops in your head first when you hear monopoly, or one of the first things, is that, monopolies are bad. They're not good for society. And we're going to talk about that later in chapter 12. And that's, true for a lot of things. But here, if a firm's a natural monopoly, it's actually going to have a lot of benefits for consumers, and they'll also have government oversight. So to have this natural monopoly, you're granted this, this natural monopoly for your business, and the government basically limits the competition in that area. So where do we actually see this? This is electric companies, water, all of these things. If you rent and you're paying electricity, you don't have a choice where you're getting electric from. For around Glassboro and the area, you're getting it from Atlantic City Electric. And if you don't rent, maybe ask your parents. Same thing with water. It's typically from the city, but it's one seller. You can't switch sellers. So why is that? Well, or why do they have this natural monopoly? Well, all of the electric posts, the wires and everything in your town, that's all paid for, or that's all owned by your electric company. So AC Electric by me. And if that's the case, and you want to start up this different electric company because you hate AC Electric, which I understand, but you're going to start it up. Well, you have to start wiring all over the town again. You have to maybe put up your own post, because maybe the electric company, AC Electric, doesn't allow you to use those. You have to put all of those up. You need to wire houses. You need to put, a big, I can't think of the word, but the big machines that give energy and electricity out. You have to put all that in before you can even give a customer electricity. That's a lot of money. So these things are granted this natural monopoly, and they're the only ones going to be in the area. Now, we typically think monopolies and have higher prices, which might be true, but what the government does is that they provide some oversight. And they ensure that they're not price gouging the consumers or charging too much, or maybe doing something that's not good for people who need electric, which is everyone. So, you might not think, oh, the government's not doing a great job, but, they're still overseeing it, and you can have your own opinions, but that's better than just having a regular monopoly. So natural monopolies are overseen by the government, and the idea is not to price gouge us.